Auspicious Pattern Lotus House, Volume 1, Scarlet Sparrow. Chapter 1, Auspicious Pattern Lotus House. Book 1, The Blue Window Has a Ghost Murderer. Changzhou City, Xiaomian Inn, the night of June 17th, 3 a.m. Cheng Yunhe, the chief officer of the Crane Escort Company, had been on the road for 2 days with 16 boxes of goods. Although the journey was safe, he was very nervous and exhausted. The moment he closed his eyes, he had fallen asleep, but he woke up suddenly for some reason. The dark room was silent. Outside the window, there was a certain sound. There was a breeze of ethereal voices, as if someone was singing. They seemed to be singing very seriously, but then the tone was very strange, like a song being sung by a broken tongue. Cheng Yunhe's eyes fluttered open, and he looked at the window facing his bed. In the pitch blackness, there were emerald-green dot-like shadows, faintly floating on the window. Some looked far away, and some looked near, but they were only at the window facing him. The singing outside the window was far away, the broken tongue singing a sad song that not just any stranger could understand. He had practiced martial arts for nearly 40 years, although his eyes and ears were not the best in the Jianghu. They were at least not weak, but at that moment, the voice he heard was no human voice. The wind rustled through the open window as he stared at it, eyes focusing on the blue and green shadows, and he suddenly thought of a specific word for the first time in his life. Ghost? The sky and the sun were as bright as could be. The town of Pingshan was an inconspicuous little place, with neither rare treasures nor outstanding people, just like most places in the martial arts world. The people in the town were all a bit boring, the crops growing in the fields were all a bit thin and flimsy, and the river water was a bit dirty, which meant that there were few things to talk about after one ate dinner. In fact, there were too few things, so on the rare occasion that something to talk about did come up, everyone would be talking about it non-stop. This was the case with the recent incident, which was quite a strange one. The incident went something like this. On a day in June, when the people of Pingshan opened their doors to sweep the dust from their floors into the streets, they suddenly found that there was a mysterious 2-story wooden building in the middle of the road. This wooden building was not a short one. In fact, it was completely suitable for people to live in, and very spacious at that. The whole building was entirely made of wood, and it was carved with surprisingly delicate and gorgeous patterns, that even a blind person could feel it with their fingers. The engravings were of lotus flowers and auspicious clouds. After the townspeople had discussed this matter for a long time, a few of the sharp-eyed people pointed out how this building had appeared very suddenly. It turned out that its entire structure was in fact a building, but it was not connected to the ground in any way, and so this building was discovered. It was pulled by a carriage, transported to the street in Pingshan, and placed there suddenly. The townspeople were amazed. What was the use of it? Was it to be used as an earth temple in Pingshan? Speaking of which, the earth temple had been in disrepair for many years, and no one had even lit incense near it for who knew how long. The gossip about this mysterious lotus-patterned building lasted for 3 days. At this time, a man who was an officer in an escort company came home by chance. When he arrived, he was shocked when he saw the mysterious building and shouted wildly on the spot, "Auspicious building!" At that moment, he forgot about returning to his home and turned around running wildly, all the while screaming, "Auspicious building! Auspicious building!" After this, the building suddenly was regarded as a ghost building, and it was said that anyone who went near it would go crazy. It wasn't until 7 days later that the escort officer suddenly brought the entire escort agency back to Pingshan, and the townspeople realized that this building was, in fact, not a ghost building. Not only was it not a ghost building, but it was also a building of great blessings. This mysterious lotus house with auspicious patterns was a medical clinic, of all things. Its owner was none other than a man named Lianhua. Now, what kind of person was Lianhua? In fact, no one in the world knew the entire answer to that. The identity of his teacher, the level of his martial arts skills, and his age were unknown. This man had been in the field for 6 years, but had only done 2 things in total. Although 2 wasn't very many, these 2 things made the Lotus House become arguably the most famous thing in the whole area. A most curious legend. Now, Li Lianhua did these 2 things. The first thing was bringing Shi Wenjue back to life. He was a famous champion of martial arts literature who had died of serious injuries in a duel and had been buried for several days. The second thing he did was bring back the iron hero, He Lantie, who fell to his death from a cliff. He had also been buried for many days. These two things alone were what made Li Lianhua the person he was, the man that most people in the world wanted to get to know and make friends with. Not to mention the fact that he also had a strange house that he could take anywhere with him at any time. This was what made Li Lianhua such a legend. The chief escort of the Crane Escort Company led the whole agency as they rushed to Pingshan on horseback. He had bathed and burned incense for 3 days, until finally, and with trembling hands, he gifted a greeting card to the Lotus House. The card read, "Crane Escort Chief Officer Cheng Yunhe has something important to speak to you about." He slipped the message through a crack in the window. Afterwards, as many as 40 or 50 people of every rank from the escort agency waited with Cheng Yunhe, as if the emperor himself was in the Lotus House. Soon, the wooden building, which was as quiet as if no one lived in it, made a creaking sound. The officers of Crane Escort held their breaths, and even the passers-by who were watching became entranced, staring wide-eyed and waiting to see what kind of ghost would reveal itself. Suddenly, to everyone's surprise, the wooden door shot open. A large cloud of dust blew out from the door with a bang, blowing straight into Cheng Yunhe's face. The person behind the door gasped and said very apologetically, "Oh, pardon me. I was cleaning and I didn't know there were guests outside the door. Oh, I'm ashamed, quite ashamed." The group of people with their faces full of dirt and dust didn't move a muscle. They could only stare in astonishment at the person standing before them holding a broom with a bright red greeting card stuck to the bristles. He looked very young, no more than 27. If he hadn't been wearing gray clothes with many patches, he might have looked even younger. He had quite a fair complexion and elegant appearance, but he was not unparalleled in his impressive looks. He was holding a broom in his right hand and a dustpan in his left, looking apologetically at the group of people outside his door. Cheng Yunhe coughed heavily and saluted with his fists clasped in front of himself. "I'm Crane traveling thousands of miles. Cheng Yunhe. I've come to pay my respects to Physician Li, and I would also like you to inform him that Chief Cheng has something to report to him." The young man in gray asked, "Report?" Cheng Yunhe replied in a deep voice, "Yes. I also request Physician Li Lianhua to meet with me. I have an important matter to discuss." The young man in gray put down his broom. "I am Li Lianhua." Shocked, Cheng Yunhe's eyes went wide as saucers, and his jaw dropped nearly to the floor. At that moment, if you had been one of the onlookers, you would have been tempted to throw a few eggs in his mouth. Soon he composed himself, coughing heavily. "I have long admired you, Physician Li." He didn't know what to say next. He had already carefully written everything he had wanted to say on the greeting card, but unfortunately the card had gotten stuck on Li Lianhua's broom bristles. Li Lianhua said, "Oh, I'm ashamed, quite ashamed. Please excuse the dust on the floor." He raised his hand and invited Cheng Yunhe to come in and sit. The Lotus Tower was indeed full of sundries, including hammers, saws, and axes, rags, and brooms. There was sawdust and dirt everywhere, and there were several boxes with unknown things in them. There was only one table and one chair in the front hall, all made of bamboo and not worth even 20 copper coins. Cheng Yunhe's heart was full of doubt, but the Lotus Tower was so famous that any man who invited him in must be the owner. And either way, he didn't dare to suspect that this person was a fake. All he could do was sit respectfully opposite Li Lianhua. He proceeded to tell him the horror he had encountered half a month before. Half a month earlier, Xiaomian Inn, midnight. When Cheng Yunhe woke up that night and found that there was a blue shadow floating in the window and a strange singing outside, he could only think of the word ghost in his heart, but then he couldn't help laughing. He had been exploring the martial arts world for more than 20 years, and he never believed in ghosts. He was broken out of his laughter when suddenly a scream came from the room next door. Cheng Yunhe was taken aback and rushed to see what happened. His oldest disciple, Cui Jiangke, had also seen the ghosts in the window and had got up to check the boxes of goods they were transporting. He opened the well-sealed cargo box but found that it was completely empty. All of the gold, silver, and jewels had disappeared from the cargo boxes. But it wasn't the disappearance of the goods that made Cui Jiangke, who had been working as an agency officer for more than 10 years, scream so loud. What made him utter the horrified scream was that not only were there no goods in the cargo box, but the walls of the box were covered in bloody fingerprints. The fingerprints were like those of someone who had accidentally been sealed in and was struggling to get out. So as it happened, the so-called ghost of Jiamian Inn had appeared at the same time that these fingerprints were discovered. It couldn't have been a coincidence. When Cheng Yunhe burst through the door and saw this, he became shocked and angry. He ordered his disciples to open all 16 of the boxes they had ordered to guard. 10 of the 16 boxes were indeed filled with jewels and jade. 6 were empty, each were covered with more bloody fingerprints. 3 were filled with fruit, and one of the remaining 2 boxes was completely empty. And the last box contained a corpse. It was the body of a young girl in white clothes with a delicate and beautiful appearance, but the most horrible thing was her terrified expression. After seeing the corpse, Cheng Yunhe and Cui Jiangke's expressions were even more terrified than hers. Everyone in the martial arts world would recognize this girl in white. She was known as the Jade Sword, Yu Qiushuang, and she was the daughter of the governor of Yu City, Yu Mulan. Yu Mulan dominated the southwestern mountains and monopolized the Kunlun jade mines. He was the richest man in the martial arts world and was known for doting on his daughter. So how did Yu Qiushuang die in this random cargo box secured by the little-known Crane escort agency? There was a commotion in the other guest rooms of Jiamian Inn, and in a short while dozens of people broke into Cui Jiangke's room, all of them shocked as their faces turned pale. Only then did Cheng Yunhe know that Yu Qiushuang was staying at Jiamian Inn that night. When the 50 or 60 Yu City swordsmen accompanying her were startled by the ghost in the blue window, Yun Jiao, a close friend who had shared a room with her, suddenly couldn't find her. Everyone looked frantically for her and came into that room to find her dead in Cheng Yunhe's cargo box. This was the ghost murder in the blue window incident that had been all the rage in the martial arts world for half a month. Yu Mulan was heartbroken that his beloved daughter had died for no reason. In a rage, he executed all the swordsmen who followed her that night and issued a hunting order to kill the members of the Crane escort agency. Cheng Yunhe was desperate and was about to disband his company and flee with his family when he suddenly came across the Lotus Tower. Li Lianhua could heal the dead, Cheng Yunhe suddenly thought. So if Li Lianhua could bring Yu Qiushuang back to life, wouldn't everything be fine? Half a month ago, Cheng Yunhe would never have believed in such things, but now he was desperate for a miracle. Since fate had made him meet Li Lianhua, why not give it a try? If the legend proved to be true, wouldn't everything be back to normal? But to his annoyance, as he explained the ghost murder incident, Li Lianhua didn't comment on anything. He just sat there listening intently with a mildly dazed expression, saying, "Aha! Oh, is that so? Oh." After drinking his tea, Cheng Yunhe had no choice but to leave. If Li Lianhua wasn't going to answer anything worthwhile, he really couldn't think of any reason to stay in the Lotus Tower that was so full of dust. So Cheng Yunhe left. On the second floor of the Lotus Tower, someone said leisurely, 5 years later and you're still so famous. Li Lianhua just sat on the chair drinking his tea. I don't know what you're talking about. I really don't understand, said the person on the second floor as he walked down the stairs. This person was skinny and pale. If he had gained 20 pounds, he might have been a handsome young man, but instead he only looked hungry. But this hungry-looking man was actually wearing particularly fine and gorgeous white robes, with long tassels and a long sword with a particularly elegant shape. He finished. How can anyone in the world believe in the resurrection of the dead? It's been 5 years and no one has forgotten those 2 embarrassing facts about you. That's because they're not as smart as you are, Li Lianhua said, smiling softly. He stood up and stretched his muscles. He picked up the broom and continued to sweep the dusty floor. Can you stop sweeping the floor so much? The frail man who had came down from upstairs said. He suddenly widened his eyes. Majestic Master Fang is in front of you, but all you can do is sweep. Do you realize that if Cheng Yunhe knew that I was here, he would have kneeled down and begged me to tell that old man Yu Mulan not to kill him? Nope, Li Lianhua said. I haven't repaired or cleaned this house in a long time. It's very dirty and it'll leak when it rains. The man in white stared at him for a long time with his eyes wide, and then he suddenly sighed. Ugh, you can neither fight nor heal, neither farm nor steal. How did you survive so famously for so many years? I really don't know. I seriously can't figure it out. This starving-looking man was actually the eldest son of the Fang family in the martial arts world. He was known as the Sorrowful Young Master, Fang Duobing. He had known Li Lianhua for 6 years, long enough to know the details about the 2 things that had made Li Lianhua famous. When Shi Wenjue was seriously injured in a duel, Li Lianhua had performed the tortoise breath method to heal his wounds. The local villagers had buried him, and Li Lianhua went to dig him up, and Shi Wenjue just naturally came back to life. As for Hulan Tie, he failed to find a wife, so he jumped from a cliff and became seriously injured. The townspeople thought he was dead as well, so they buried him. Li Lianhua just happened to be passing by his grave and dug him out. Those were the true details behind the famous resurrections that Li Lianhua had supposedly performed. Merely coincidences. Everyone in the martial arts world was curious about how Li Lianhua could bring the dead back to life, but Feng Duobing just wanted to know how he had known that there was a person who had been buried alive. I still have some money from back then, Li Lianhua said as he carefully swept the front hall and put away the dustpan. As long as one does their calculations well, one can also live well. Feng Duobing rolled his eyes. And just how much money do you have left? 50 taels, Li Lianhua said with a smug smile. For me, I could live off that for a lifetime. Feng Duobing snorted. There's a scoundrel like you who only intends to spend 50 taels of silver? What a disgrace. If Zheng Yunhe knew what kind of person you really were, I wonder if he still would have come begging you. Yeah, right. A miracle doctor who doesn't know a little bit about medical skills is so petty that he won't even stay at an inn, and can only wander around with his house behind him like a turtle with a shell. Thank goodness Zheng Yunhe seemed to figure it out and left. Feng Duobing rolled his eyes again, glancing up and down at Li Lianhua. However, I know you, and you won't just let this slide. It's not like you to ignore something like this. Having sat back on his chair, Li Lianhua was fiddling with the tenons of his creaky bamboo table with his fingers. He smiled softly when he heard Feng Duobing's words. Why shouldn't I go? Like you said, I can neither farm nor sell vegetables, and it's not like I have lots of money. Wouldn't life be boring without something to do? Well, once old man Yu Mulan finds out that you're a fake miracle doctor, this noble Master Feng won't be here to save you, Feng Duobing said leisurely. Go, I won't see you off. Then Li Lianhua tidied up the Lotus Tower for the next 3 days. After carefully writing a long letter and temporarily entrusting the tower to the care of Shi Wenjue, he finally set off on foot. He was going to Yu City to see Yu Chuoshuang's body.